everyone. Well, welcome to the webinar around economic development's golden opportunity. Super excited to have you all here. My name is Sedale Turbovsky. I'll be hosting. I am the CEO and co-founder of OpenGrants, and we are a company focused on activating grant funding for individuals, companies, small businesses that are doing the most important work in the world. And really excited to have some awesome folks here on this panel, some of the smartest people I know who are working on economic development here in the United States. So welcome. As noted here, if you want to introduce yourself in the chat, please do. Today we'll be in a meeting format. So that means if you can also please make sure your microphone is on mute. The idea here is that this will give you a little better access to ask questions, and we hope that you will. But if you could make sure to mute your microphone, feel free to introduce yourself in chat, and you can ping us in chat if you have any issues with connectivity. And yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. You know, I'm really excited to dive into the topic for today. As many of you are aware, I'm sure there is a lot of interesting discussions happening right now about what's happening with all of this federal assistance money and the other kind of really cool opportunities that are presented to us, kind of a silver lining of this really terrible experience that we've all gone through together of a global pandemic, is this opportunity to rebuild and to create something new and interesting and really compelling for everyone. So joining us on the panel today, we have some incredible folks. We have Shawn Garvey here, who is the CEO of Momentum, Molly Pyle, who is the lead entrepreneurial ecosystem development at the Center on Rural Innovation, and Sophia Zheng, who is the founder and CEO of Bludot. And I'm going to go ahead and let you all introduce yourselves, give a little background on who you are, and we'll take it from there. So if Shawn, if you, we'll just go in order of the slide here. So Shawn, if you want to just introduce yourself real quick, a little background on yourself and Momentum, and that'd be awesome if you want to kick us off.
Sure thing. Hey, Sedale, good morning to everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Shawn Garvey, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Momentum, a California-based company that helps to design, develop, and deploy advanced energy, transportation, and manufacturing technologies and innovations. We've assisted in more than $6 billion of projects, often funded or co-funded with federal and state partners. Includes everything from transportation innovations, electric and zero-emission buses, subways, construction of new public buildings, and the build-out of new incubation and acceleration programs around the country.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, really excited. Shawn is a longtime friend, mentor, and also, in full disclosure, an investor in OpenGrants. So really excited to have Shawn here. And Molly, if you want to just go ahead and give a little background and introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. Great to be here with y'all today. As Sedale said, I'm Molly Pyle. I'm the Entrepreneur Ecosystem Development Lead at CORI, or the Center on Rural Innovation. And CORI is a national nonprofit that is really focused on a comprehensive approach to closing the rural opportunity gap that emerged out of the Great Recession. And we do that by actually partnering with rural communities all across the country to help them build digital economy ecosystem strategies. Ultimately, this is frameworks, methods, plans, big schemes, ultimately to help usher in the tech-based and innovation kind of needed to succeed in the 21st century. And since 2019, a relatively young organization, 4 years old, but since 2019, we've had the honor and the privilege to help rural communities raise more than $13 million in federal funding and in matching dollars. And throughout that process, we work very closely with these rural community leaders to assess their local assets, their strengths, their opportunities, speak with stakeholders, and really devise those actionable strategies that can help them implement a digital economy focused on entrepreneurship and innovation in their hometown. So excited to be here with y'all and dig into that a little more.
Awesome. Super excited to have you with us. As someone who recently moved to a rural community, I can attest to just how important that work is. The idea of doing the work I do, I mean, currently I have to commute a full 45 minutes in one direction in order to get to internet that is sufficient for the kind of work that I do. So really important stuff. I'm really excited to hear your comments today. And last but certainly not least, Sophia, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself a bit and Bludot.
Sounds great. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here today. Thanks everyone for hopping on. I'm Sophia, founder and CEO of Bludot. At Bludot, we're actually building a software platform for economic development teams. And specifically, we're focused on the small to medium-sized communities. We started actually as a 16-week partnership with the city of Walnut Creek, which is out here in the Bay Area. Their economic development team was a total of 1.3 full-time people supporting over 5,000 local businesses. So that's actually, team of ones and team of twos are the typical communities that we work with, just super dedicated folks that are trying to do the best for their local businesses, and then we're trying to make them, the superheroes and maximize their impact. So since public launch in the beginning of 2020, we're now used in communities in over 12 states. Just yesterday, we announced a statewide launch in the state of Kentucky. So that would be our first statewide launch. And also, Molly, you mentioned the rural communities, and so it's really funny because we also received a grant from USDA SBIR to do a rural economic development study. So we're recruiting 43 rural communities to join us. Would love to speak to you more about that, but really excited to be here today and talk more about economic development.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's really great and super exciting, and congratulations. I was actually speaking with the state of Kentucky this morning, which is some
cool
overlap there. Yeah. So, I really excited to dive into this first point. I think, everyone who has been alive for the last year can really sort of, this really resonates that this is a really unprecedented, time. We've just gone through this and continue to go through this in many places. This global pandemic with a really, it's really exposed some of the cracks that we have in our ecosystem. It's certainly brought to our attention some of the places where we don't have a lot of resiliency, some of the things that we might think about changing. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts, and any of you can kind of tackle this one first, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you see as the landscape of economic development now, as we, kind of slog through sort of late and post-pandemic stages in different places around the world, and specifically in the United States. What does that look like, and what does that kind of mean for economic development in general?
Sedale, I'll take a first shot at that.
Awesome.
So I think what we're seeing, and we're seeing this particularly in the release of some of the larger grant funding opportunities from the federal government through the Department of Transportation and the Department of Commerce over the last 6 months, is a very, very sudden shift in priorities from the new administration. We're seeing significant shift with the adoption of language like, as you said, resiliency, economic resiliency, and environmental resiliency. We're seeing a shift to innovation, and we've already seen a number of very serious federal investments in incubation and acceleration in emerging industries, health tech, energy tech, clean tech, transportation technologies. I think we're expecting to see over the next 4 years, if you look at the Biden investment plans, a lot more of that, a lot more investment in local economic development organizations, in local universities and community colleges, in helping to support, inspire, and accelerate new companies and new business and economic development opportunities. And I think the third thing, and I think I'll reserve the thrust of this conversation to later, but a major pivot to the concept of equity. This is not something that we saw with any seriousness over the last 4 years. And we are seeing in the federal solicitations, most recently, the RAISE program, which is the old Tiger and Build infrastructure programs. These have been out since before the Obama administration. They were called Tiger, then they were called Build under the Trump administration. They're now called RAISE. RAISE is initially this year $1 billion for, and notably in the title of RAISE, which stands for Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity. And I'm going to return to that topic throughout this conversation because the idea of sustainability / resiliency and equity, racial, economic, and other forms of equity are going to be deeply embedded over the next 4 years in all of our funding opportunities. And people are going to have to be, organizations and agencies are going to have to be very aware of how they relate to those concepts.
Yeah, that's very exciting. We're certainly seeing some of the same things. Is Sophia and Molly have additional comments you'd like to share?
Yeah, just sorry, I'll just chime in really quickly here. The one thing I want to add is that from our work with local cities and counties throughout the pandemic and now as we're coming out of it.
Did we lose her audio, or is that just me? Sophia, I think you might be muted there. Molly, do you want to go ahead and chime in? And
sorry, Sophia. Maybe she can't hear us either, but it's what Shawn was alluding to, or really clearly highlighting about the focus on equity, which I also find very exciting. The EDA, Economic Development Administration, coming out with equity and inclusion and diversity being highlighted as actually one of those key pillars for all of their future programs and funding opportunities to be focused on, was something that we were really thrilled to see as we were supporting communities just a couple months ago in applying to the Build to Scale Venture Challenge, which is an infusion of capital in helping build these scalable tech startup ecosystems. And seeing more programs and funding available for that as well, for equitable systems and programs that can help people step into the world of tech entrepreneurship and find the programs, find the pathways, find the partners, and ultimately then find the funding, is something I'm really excited about. And like Shawn mentioned, there's so many acronyms, as we all know, in the world of government. There's RAISE, and then there's most recently announced the USDA RISE, the RISE opportunity, Rural Innovation Stronger Economy Grant, which is really exciting, again, to support new industries, new businesses cropping up, and also the actual infrastructure. So funding to build an incubator space in your rural community, funding to provide the digital skilling and the worker training for the folks to then take the new jobs that are created by the startups. So training people up, creating the spaces. I think a lot of what we heard about, COVID and the recovery was this, great reset or building back better. So it's exciting to see how we can interpret that in lots of different ways, and what that means really depends on your local community, your context, your vision, but rooted in this idea that we can help folks, step into the future, the new economy, with new skills and new places and programs that help them adjust and adapt. So I'm excited. I think it's finally a moment of optimism after a very dark, pretty pessimistic year and a half we've had.
Yeah, no, it is very exciting. It's one of the reasons we're really fired up. And Sophia had a few technical difficulties a moment ago, but we'll bring you back up and see if we can hear you this time.
Can everybody hear me now?
There we go.
Okay, good. I don't know what happened. Probably just mysteries of the universe. Okay, well, I was just going to say that it's a great opportunity right now also for cities to have a better ways and to be more engaged with their existing and local businesses. During the pandemic, obviously the businesses were all looking for cities to support, and we're also seeing a lot of really amazing shop local campaigns from our local cities and counties that we work with. So I think it's even, as we're coming out of the pandemic, I think it's also a great opportunity for the local cities and counties to stay engaged with their local businesses, really listen to their needs, find out how they can best support them, and just continue these kind of activities and support. I think it's a great thing that we should continue in the economic development to come.
Awesome. Yeah, 100% agree. And just for everyone on the listening in, feel free to drop questions in chat. We're going to have a Q&A period after we work through an initial discussion here. So if you do have questions, feel free to note those in chat, or just kind of reserve them towards the tail end of this discussion. But yeah, like everyone said, we're fired up, we're excited, we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel at the very least, in a lot of places. I do obviously want to be cognizant that there are other areas that are still, very much struggling with the pandemic. But as we focus here on our discussion around economic development here in the United States, and think about how excited everyone is, we're like, all right, ready to go. What do we do next? Like, I think that's a question that's been on a lot of people's minds. Like, what happens? Like, all right, we're good. We got all this money that might be around doing different things, all these programs. We're excited about building back better. And what steps do we take next? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on just what are the maybe top 3 recommendations you have for folks who are, in the trenches, in their communities, at the state level, at the local government level, at the federal level, even. What are your top 3 recommendations? Where, like, how would you love to see things proceed? And feel free to, take it in your own lens, or be really broad, but would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sedale, I'll jump in first. So I think that the thing that I'd want folks left with is the importance of these new elements for project evaluation and funding evaluation, and the importance of being prepared for those. This is a sort of a dynamic conversation that's going on at a national level. There are new tools being developed that are supporting both the evaluators at the federal agencies in evaluating proposals that are being submitted. And I think that a lot of project developers in NGOs, in companies, in local economic development agencies need to be aware of those and need to be prepared for them, because as we all know, when a solicitation is released, you have somewhere between 4 and 8 or 12 weeks to complete a solicitation. And historically, we've focused on things like project ideation. Who are the collaborators? What are the data? What types of data are we measuring for in a project, whether it's a construction project or a human resources investment initiative, or something like that? And those criteria are changing, and they're changing fairly quickly. I'll mention a couple. First of all, if folks are not already aware of and socialized to Executive Order 13985, which was one of the first executive orders under the Biden administration. This is the executive order that mandates that federal investment include new criteria for equity and the distribution of federal resources into communities that have historically been underrepresented in these types of projects. You need to be familiar with EO 13985 and what the criteria and objectives are, because you're going to start to see through that lens a lot of new requirements and a lot of new expectations in many of these solicitations. One of them that I've noticed has been embedded in several major federal solicitations that have come out just in the last 60 days is the racial equity impact assessment. And I'll be really honest with you, this is as much diversity work and disadvantaged community work that we've done. It was the first time that we had heard of it, and it was initially in that RAISE application. This is a tool that has been developed over the last 8 or 10 years that is becoming commonplace in federal solicitations. And it's a systematic examination of how different racial and ethnic groups are going to be affected by a public investment. We're being asked, yes or no, we're being asked to attach the racial equity impact assessment to proposals. It is being implied, at least, sometimes insisted upon, that will be a new part of the scoring criteria. And so this is, again, this is one of those new tools that if you've been working in the field of economic development, infrastructure development over the last 10 years, you may or may not have seen this tool. You are now going to begin to see this tool in many federal applications, and it's highly likely that part of the scoring of your proposal is going to include whether or not you A, have one, and B, how robust it is. And there are other tools like that we're seeing as well, tools that evaluate the percentage of labor union participation in a contract, the payment of prevailing wages, whether or not there's a workforce development element of a project, even if it's an infrastructure project. How are you going to ensure, if we're building out, let's say, electric vehicle infrastructure or new transportation corridors, that there's training associated with the jobs that are going to be necessary for the workforce of tomorrow? And we've got a much more proactive administration in place, and we're seeing that in all of the solicitations. And we, as project managers, fund development people, people doing economic development, workforce development, we need to be able to see into that future and begin to prepare now, rather than, wait until the solicitations are released.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Shawn. That's very insightful, and I think right on point. Molly, do you want to offer your thoughts on sort of recommendations that you have as you've been doing your work?
Yeah, I was excited to read, as I was looking over all of the different ways and sort of creative, I think, strategies communities may apply to use these funds. And one of the things I noticed is it provides resources to not only respond to the immediate harms of the pandemic, but also mitigate its longer term impact in compounding the systemic public health and economic challenges. And the economic challenges, of course, is the piece that we focus on. And so the longer term economic challenges, I think you can interpret that in lots of different ways, right? And there is room for that interpretation within the ways that you can spend some of this funding. So as someone has actually written in the chat too, broadband development, I'm going to talk about broadband. That's one of the big things that Center on Rural Innovation does as well. So thinking about broadband infrastructure, access to the internet being this basic utility that was really proven and laid bare by the pandemic, just how important it is for communities to have access to broadband, especially as you look at folks transitioning to remote work and remote learning. Just for an example of that, tens of millions of Americans live in areas, so many of which are rural, where there is no broadband infrastructure, or the infrastructure provides download speeds no greater than maybe 25 megabits or upload speeds of 3. So compare this to the fact that the FCC states that a household with 2 telecommuters and 2 to 3 remote learners is estimated to need 100 megabits to download and to work successfully. So we're looking at places that have at most 25 and needed 100 in the pandemic and throughout the pandemic. So just that alone, I think, really speaks to the need, and why I was glad to see broadband being prioritized here, and thinking about the ways that your community can use this to build better broadband infrastructure to reach those places in your community, the pockets that maybe hadn't had it before. So making that access more ubiquitous, huge and fantastic. And I hope that more funding and more initiatives even come out around broadband, because that cannot be understated and is really at the core of everything else that we can make possible. If there's no broadband reaching the populations in your community, there's no possibility for tech startups or remote work to happen, right? So broadband first and foremost, and then I would say focusing on the educational disparities. So there is some funding available, it looks like, for under-resourced school districts, K through 12 STEM programs, or I'm kind of leaning into the STEM and the coding. If you're thinking about doing after-school programs or boot camps for youth, thinking about how, if you get started with the K through 12 and coding and entrepreneurship content in that early youth stage, that's the pipeline that you're building, especially in rural and micropolitan areas, for the future tech entrepreneurs, the future remote workers, the future digital skilled employees who can go work the tech jobs at the local hospital or the bank or anywhere else in the community. So planting the seed early, leveraging the funding that's there for education to start to really infuse that tech and new economy skilling into the education and the programs your community can have. That, I would say, is number 2. And then 3, my focus obviously being on entrepreneurship and small business support. Are there ways you can think about supporting particularly those disproportionately impacted by the pandemic? So people of color, frontline workers, and helping folks think about what is that long-term opportunity for them to maybe transition into, like we were saying, more resilient careers or workforces that seem to be non-disruptible during the pandemic. So a lot of digital jobs, remote work, and obviously being your own boss, being the founder of something. So helping start those programs, funding in any way possible the spark of innovation and entrepreneurship, whether that's, again, with an after-school program, or if you can get creative and flexible and make it work to fund, an ideation boot camp or an early stage incubator. Things like that, I think, would be really helpful when they talk about the long-term impact. It's going to take a while to build back and create more, I think, infrastructure for folks to launch their own businesses and have the safety net that's not available to so many folks, and why they can't do that. But how your programs, how your communities can optimize for that, I hope that this funding can really be a launch pad for some of those programs and events.
Yeah, and when you see headlines like droves of people quitting their retail jobs or just not going back to work, there's a huge opportunity with the untapped economic potential and human capital that is really just waiting for those kind of programs. Sophia, would love to hear your thoughts on just recommendations as people wrangle these pretty heavy topics.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the broadband topic really resonated with me because in the rural communities that we've spoken with, especially through the pandemic, being able to receive information and communicate digitally over the internet was so critical. Our entire platform would not function if there is no internet. So being able to disseminate those information and receive the health orders and things through emails, right? Something as basic as that may not something that we probably take for granted, but may not be the case for a lot of rural communities. So really resonated with that. The only other few things that I do want to add is, the first is invest in really good data. A lot of the communities that we work with may not even have a comprehensive list of all the businesses in their community, right? So without that, how can they reach out to all of the restaurants? How can they reach out to the businesses that have less than 25 employees that may qualify for the grant? Or some of the communities that we work with may want to reach out to the businesses where the owners might want to be thinking of retiring, help them with succession planning, or reach out to businesses that may have trouble finding employees at the moment, right? So just having this kind of data handy is something that we're really focusing on, and is something that is really, really going to be helpful in the long run for the communities to have these kind of strategies in place and being more proactive instead of just being reactive. Speaking of data, and I think, for example, one that also leads into the kind of the equity discussion that we really focused on today here. For example, having access to data also means that if your city does want to launch an initiative, let's say an emergency grant program, having data allows you to see, are the businesses that you're picking in your rewards, in your grant support, are they equitable? Do they represent a fair share of all of the businesses in the community? Do they represent founders of different backgrounds? Or is it just concentrated in the businesses that make the most noise at the city, or are they, it needs to be a fair representation for the business owners regardless of their age, their experience. Are they a new entrepreneur? Are they a legacy business owner, right? So it needs having access to that kind of data enables that kind of strategy analysis and be more mindful towards those kind of initiatives. The second thing I want to highlight is having the channel to actually reach the local business owners. Historically, without the channel, you may only hear from businesses that are of particular, demographic style. Maybe the businesses that are more comfortable reaching out, through some of the more public means. But being able to having the channel not just from the city's perspective to reach out to local business owners, but give the local business owners a channel where they feel safe and comfortable to reach back to the city and the county if they need any support, if they need any help, to feel like they can have a channel that is equitable, that is safe, that is comfortable, where they feel like they have a concierge desk in the city that they can go to and get those concerns answered is super critical, is something that we really want to encourage all of the cities and counties to think about in terms of investing in the tools and systems in place going forward.
100%. Yes. Thank you so much for bringing that up. It's, we've been working on a project with a group locally, and they've been creating these sort of like listening circles and listening sessions, and it's been incredibly effective. Those are great points, Sophia. And I'll just, we're going to reverse the order here. So we'll go Sophia, Molly, Shawn this time. And Sophia, I'd love to hear your thoughts, just, as we think about, these priorities, would love to hear your thoughts just around your predictions for, where you think, where you're starting to see maybe some of this money go, or what sort of trends you're thinking of as we look at like relief packages over not just 2021, but 2022 and into the future. What are your thoughts around maybe what the administration might be doing and where some of this capital might be headed?
Yeah, I think one trend that I'm really, really thrilled and excited about is, the other panelists I mentioned before, the direct funding going straight to the local economic development level. That is something that is truly amazing, and I can already see a lot of the local cities and counties putting some really amazing and good use for those money. The other thing I want to say is that because the language seems to be geared towards more broader usage for those money rather than restrictive. So I think that gives our local cities and counties a lot of leeway and a lot of control over how they want to spend that money, and be extremely strategic on tailoring that towards the specific needs of their city and their community. So I would say, and my predictions, I think I would say the local cities and counties are going to put some really good use for those funding, and to really stimulate local economies, right? So I think the local cities are going to spend a lot of effort in efforts and systems and investments that will stimulate the local economy, grow the local businesses, business retention and expansion, supporting the local community, incentivize consumer spending. So I think that's some of the trends that we're definitely seeing from some of the projects that we're working on.
Very cool. Awesome. Molly?
Yeah, I love that. All of that I would be thrilled to see, as well as no surprise here, we would like, and we are optimistic that there will be even more funding for the critical broadband infrastructure, because even though that is included in this act, there is more work to be done to get our country on the whole at the level where it needs to be in terms of broadband accessibility. I also think there will be more skilling for new economy jobs. So as we are once again embracing this transition, seeing the efficacy of remote work and distributed teams, helping folks skill up and find the programs and the tools and the resources and the education that they need to actually do that in a way, again, that is accessible and equitable. I'm hopeful that that is something that we'll be seeing as well. And that big focus on, broadband and equity, and also entrepreneurship. So the diversity that we've been talking about, the inclusion, the equity in these programs, it would be fantastic to see even more of that, more startup activity and more support and funding in these historically underserved communities, more availability and use of direct community investment, like Sophia is saying, to help local residents buy back the block, as they're calling this initiative, and seeing that more local community and economic development, helping small businesses and startup entrepreneurs. And also something around, I would just like to see, because it's an issue I hear in rural, and I know it's obviously something that's a huge challenge in urban areas, is affordable housing. So getting people houses, internet, and jobs, right? And then we're good. But ultimately finding the creative and strategic programs and plans and funding sources that can tie all that together and make it a reality. That's what I would really like to see.
Awesome. All right.
Sedale, I think that what we're going to see over the next year or two is an increasing attention paid to the unintended consequences of state and federal policy. I think that we have a very, in many cases, there's a fairly sophisticated and somewhat visionary approach that the federal government in particular, although many of the states have been doing this for a while now, California and New York in particular, that there are unintended consequences to major state and federal aspirations and regulations. We're seeing that across the board, and it's been exacerbated by COVID over the last 16 months. We're going to see major transformations in the relationship to work and commuting and transportation with the work from home, the trend in work from home. That's going to have significant economic benefits and costs. There are going to be communities that pay the price for that transformation. It's not all great. There are people who lose by this change. Similarly, we're seeing major disruptions in our grid and our capability of our grid infrastructure to handle the emerging economy. We're seeing major disruptions in the supply chain, whether it's building and construction materials, whether it's just basic consumer products. We're seeing things like the Biden administration has an aspirational goal of essentially phasing out petroleum by 2045. They're going to eliminate all petroleum-based vehicles by 2035. This is a major transformation, and a lot of us get excited by that. This is zero-emission technology, it's clean tech, it's innovation. But what we sometimes forget is that there are large swaths of the country in which oil production, oil extraction is a significant, and most of those places are rural, by the way, that in which significant economic disruption can be anticipated, similar to the move away from coal and its impact on coal regions in the central Midwest, Pennsylvania and West Virginia. We have an opportunity with issues like that to get in front of the issue. So for instance, we have here in California, Kern County is the #1 oil producer in the state of California. If the state and federal government are successful in the phase out of petroleum, which they have objectives on, 2035 in California, 2045 nationally, what does Kern County do? What does Kern County, where 1/4 of its workforce is dependent on petroleum extraction? Does it transition immediately to clean technology? Are there other economic drivers in the community that can be built upon? How do we do this in a manner that's respectful of that? And I think we're going to see, I hope we see, an increasing trend to addressing those unintended consequences of things that oftentimes most of the people on this call probably consider themselves innovators and evangelists, and you are, of sort of new approaches, innovation in technology, in systems. But I think that we also need to be aware that those innovations have a cost. There's a community on the other end that is probably paying the price for the innovation. And to the degree that we can be thoughtful about that, and those communities that are going to be impacted by that are able to band together, work together, and collaborate to direct resources into workforce development and economic development, infrastructure development, I think that's the trend.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you bringing up that point. I know that you and I and others have talked about this as we build new economies and transition to new modes of thinking and doing. There are there's huge groups of folks who unfortunately don't always aren't and haven't been historically included in that transition. And I think to Molly and Sophia's points as well. Ideally, we start seeing more upskilling and other funding addressing these issues. And there's certainly a discussion to be had there that we could probably talk about for a long time. But as we consider at large kind of the comments that have been made so far, there's two things that I love. Is one is this sort of like cautious optimism of like, hey, we're like getting towards the other side of this. There's some really cool things happening. There's some really cool opportunities. And I think that, underlying that, we certainly need to have in mind this, like, oh, as we decide to build back better, how do we ensure that like what we build back is equitable across the board for everyone, from people working in these really traditional industries that may suddenly become disrupted or cease to exist, as well as, folks who, maybe haven't had a crack at the economic opportunities at all along the way. So I think that's huge. And to that point, I'd love to hear, and we'll start with Sophia again. I'd love to hear your thoughts on just, a few resources you might recommend to some of the folks on the call who are trying to wrestle with this stuff, because it's very complex. There's a lot to unpack, a lot to think through. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on just some good resources, whether it be, books or people or, other things? What are some good resources as economic development folks, as local government, state government, as they wrestle with this really unprecedented task? Where are some places they can reach out to, turn to, get, build some additional knowledge?
Yeah, I would say in terms of economic development, there is, for example, the IEDC, which is the international one, and there's many of those kind of organizations, League of Cities as well, for example. But then I would say there is also the state and regional ones that each community is probably very tapped into and very familiar with. Those state and local regional organizations might have more relevant and more kind of on the ground information and resources that are particularly applicable to that region. So I would say those are probably some of the, we're based in California and we know the East Bay, the East Bay DN and also the CalEd organizations really well. They have really relevant resources for the East Bay as well as the California region. And then there's, the Virginia ones, as well as every region, every state has their own. So I would say those organizations, they probably compile lots of really great resources. So tap into those for sure. The other thing that I would recommend is each city probably is already doing this, to see what others are doing in your region, right? So our cities routinely ask me, oh, what are other communities doing with this tool? Or what are other communities doing and how are they launching this? So I really love this kind of community sharing aspect where cities and counties can kind of share insights and learn from each other, and together come out of this stronger, and especially from the local economic development perspective, I've seen firsthand how collaborative it is, which is really, really cool. Our communities really love to share insights and help each other. So that's my 2 cents on this suggestion.
Awesome, thank you so much. And just as a quick time to check, we will be opening it up for some Q&A here shortly. And so, yeah, if you just want to keep that in mind, Molly and Shawn, and then we'll do a really quick, like a lightning question, and then we'll open it up for comments here.
Cool. Yeah, very quickly wanted to address basically the last point Shawn made is a perfect stub speech for why the Center on Rural Innovation exists. So ultimately our work is around these communities that have been left behind, and rural America point blank has never recovered even from the Great Recession, 2008. So COVID doubled down on already this inequitable recovery. And part of that is because of the rise of automation of jobs that are mostly based in rural, globalization, and this 30-year decline we've been seeing in entrepreneurship. So very excited and optimistic about both the federal and local programs and things that can be happening and resources to take advantage of to try to build back and make more resilient communities. And just one quick thing I would say to check out, because it's a community that we work with and we're very, very proud of. And because we were talking about Kentucky, I think, right before we all joined the public webinar, is that the company is called BitSource. And what they did is ultimately hope to revitalize the local economy in Pikeville, Kentucky, which was a deeply impacted through the sort of transition out of coal. And you may have seen these stories of turning coal miners into coders. So they started BitSource as an organization to help train and upskill coal miners to become remote tech workers and teach them how to code. So these are the types of things at the local level. You would maybe not think that that's available and that's a resource in Pikeville, Kentucky, but there are people like that who see that vision and who have found the ways, found the partners, found the funding to create those kinds of programs. And that's the kind of thing I would love to see more, communities, more macro level organizations and stakeholders tapping into, is what already exists in the community, who's not talking to each other, who should be, how can we start to connect those dots better and build a truly, accessible and connected ecosystem. I also, just as resources, I think the content coming out of OpenGrants is fantastic. I'm biased, but CORI posts a lot and shares a lot of resources about this as well. And I also frequently just check in on what the Kauffman Foundation is doing, because they, particularly related to entrepreneurship, do a lot of interesting research and thought leadership on rural economic development that's driven through entrepreneurship. So those are some things I would say just keep your ear to the ground, but ultimately let the local communities and the folks who've been moving and shaking and maybe feeling like a lone voice in a sea of naysayers, uplift them and see what they have to say and use them as resources and provide what resources you have to them as well.
Thank you so much, Molly. And Shawn?
Sure. I think really quickly, obviously being prepared for anticipated funding. I think that we can assume with the infrastructure program that will in all likelihood get through, and some of the other programs, as well as the redirection of already existing federal resources to more innovative approaches to making grants to local and state agencies, local state entities, being prepared. And that means assessing what types of new approaches that we should expect from the federal agencies, like we talked about before: equity, innovation, and resiliency. These are three concepts that are sort of late emerging for a lot of different types of projects and infrastructure projects. And being prepared, having the documents in place, having already done the thinking about how a project is going to interrelate or address equity issues or innovation issues or resiliency issues, so that you're not put in the position of taking a project that has perhaps been on the burner for a long time, for 2 or 3 years seeking funding, and within 4 or 5 weeks trying to create all of those supporting materials and think pieces and plans that are necessary in order to compete well. Secondly, be aware through your government and trade agencies and trade associations of the funding opportunities that are being developed. OpenGrants is a great way. That's how we track what's coming up. It's been one of the better ways that we've seen that we can identify programs that are anticipated, not just already released. Most of the other services that we've used in the past, it's essentially a look back. What was released yesterday? OpenGrants does a really good job. The only job that I've seen scaled in this way of actually looking forward at anticipated funding opportunities. Appreciate that, Sedale. Thank you for doing that. And then finally, getting in front of funding opportunities. What we're seeing is frankly, we're seeing a lot of state agencies with funds that have been made available through direct grants to states. For instance, here in California, there's a major inflow of federal monies directly to Caltrans, which is now seeking out opportunity projects to invest in. So these are projects that they become aware of that meet certain criteria, like innovation, like the installation of electric vehicle infrastructure, et cetera, that perhaps don't have the same requirements as an openly competitive, solicited RFP. One of the primary ways of doing that is socializing your project or set of projects to elected officials and key agencies, getting in front of the funding opportunities so that you're meeting with the key agencies that you expect funds to come out of and pre-socializing them to the opportunities. Because there is such a fairly significant inflow of new resources from the federal government, a lot of the state re-granting agencies are in real time trying to react to the new money while also adopting and incorporating some of these new objectives. So being in front of them, informing them, you have programs, you have projects, you're setting up a workforce development project for zero emission equipment or clean technology in Bakersfield or in Reno, and talking to your local legislators and your state funding agencies that those programs are out there beforehand, not waiting for the RFP to be released and then reacting.
Awesome. Yeah, great advice. Thank you so much. And thanks for the shout outs, both Molly and Shawn. So we're going to open it up for some questions here. Feel free to drop them in chat. One of the first ones I see here is, do you have some tips if you're working with limited team sizes or bandwidth on funding proposals? So, maybe some tips on just maximizing the ability to take advantage of all these opportunities. I'll let Molly, I know you've been deep in grant land. I know Shawn is as well, but want to tackle that one maybe?
I think what Shawn just mentioned about getting prepared, getting out in front of it, kind of getting your ducks in a row in terms of the programs and projects and partners, even having those early conversations with people who you think could be great additions is super smart and never fails, at least just from the preparation side of the house for folks. I know that this is a resource challenge for some, so it's not a one size fits all solution, but I will say that the transformative impact that a professional grant writer can have cannot be understated. So if it's between that and other things, and you can make some budget decisions, prioritizing hiring a professional grant writer is something I strongly recommend, especially if you're not very experienced in applying for federal grants or it's particularly complex, like many of them are. So I would say finding that support, whether it's internally or going out, OpenGrants as a solution, or working, CORI, we do some consulting. We won't write grants, but we'll help folks, think through particular like build to scale opportunities. But I think to the extent that that's available or an option to you, that is really helpful. And then also just thinking about, the long term, how does this funding make sense as a piece of a larger quilt, right? It's just one patchwork, but what else could it be leading to in the future so that you're not stuck in that sort of nonprofit starvation cycle of getting one, thinking that maybe you'll live for 2 years more, but you need to think more sustainably and strategically about the future and where your organization is going. What strategically makes sense for you rather than just trying to adapt and mold to whatever grant opportunity is out there right now. So.
Awesome, thank you. Shawn, Sophia, you have other thoughts on that, or?
Yep. I just want to add that some of the communities, for example, one community in Massachusetts that we're working with, they recently got a grant to stimulate their local economy, and it's amazing how much great work they can do when they get that. But I also understand the capacity constraints, right? Going back to my previous comment of the economic development team of 1.3 full-time people having to support all of the local businesses, do all of the day-to-day job. Having a grant writer can be literally the life-changing resource to help them get that resources that they could really put to really great use without having to stay up until 3 a.m, which I did myself. So when I was applying for grants. So I would say I highly encourage all of our existing current cities as well as new ones and future ones to check out OpenGrants, the resource, as well as, not just kind of check out what opportunities are out there, but also get that help in terms of capacity. They barely have enough capacity to do what they need to do as is. Applying for grants is a whole task on its own, and get some help wherever they can.
Awesome. Go ahead, Shawn, if you'd like to.
Sure, I would, just to make a distinction, I don't want to repeat any of the brilliant comments that came before about this. Certainly building out the capability of responding and reacting in real time to grants in a serious way. It's oftentimes, fund development of this sort has oftentimes been sort of like a odd stepchild in many organizations. Actually, that's not the right word. There's a different word that would be more politically correct. I'm going to exercise that one out of my lexicon. But it's been sort of this like odd little position oftentimes that agencies kind of like, oh yeah, we need a grant team, and they make some budget available to it. And what happens oftentimes in these agencies is that that the focus is on grant writing. There's a success, and then the grant writer becomes a grant administrator, which gets rid of their ability to continue to grant write. And so the ability to like build organization and build capacity and leverage capacity really gets diminished by taking that approach. Folks should begin to assess that grant writing and grant administration are two different talents. They're two different capabilities. They require different types of skill sets. A grant writer, you want to be somebody who can develop content very quickly, who can score optimize proposals in real time, who can be very strategic thinking. To apply then that resource, that internal resource, to long-term administration of a program or a project is a misallocation of the resource. Because when you identify somebody who can write grants and react and respond to grants in a serious strategic way, you do not then want to redeploy them to a long-term administration or services project. So I'd like sort of for folks to get to begin to see this in a more sophisticated way, that grant writing is a very valuable skill set that is very, very hard to recreate easily. And you want to protect that asset and resource in your agency or organization so that those folks are fresh, they're strategic, they're embedded in your strategic thinking, they're very aware of the direction you want to bring the organization, what the organization's capabilities and constraints are, and you want to reserve that capability and not redeploy it to other more administrative tasks that are associated with project administration.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's massively important. It's a great point. And I will just note that one of the ways we've organized some of the talent pool at OpenGrants in terms of our marketplace of resources where you can find these folks is around those different kinds of roles. I'm gonna say, we're coming up on the hour here, and I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. So this last question, if you can, maybe like 30 seconds, like rapid fire. What are your thoughts on how, as cities and groups are looking to engage other partnerships? Any thoughts on the best practices to source the right private partnerships as you go after funding? Bringing businesses and other groups to the table in addition to as you engage this federal money. And we'll start with Sophia and just go Sophia, Molly, Shawn.
Yeah, really quickly, I would say just to find the private partnerships that that really is going to make a difference and move the needle for your local community, right? So for example, we partnered with the community in Massachusetts several months ago when they were applying for the grant. So as they were applying for the grant, they already included these they want to do more for their local businesses. They want to better support and engage with the local businesses. So we work together to make sure that that's part of the grant, that the story they don't want to tell for that funding. So I just want to say other communities might have other needs, right? Broadband might be more relevant for some than others. So I would just say source the right private partnerships that really would move a needle for the most important priorities in your community, and start early in the grant writing process to have that partnership be part of the application you're writing.
Awesome.
Huge +1 to all of that. And I think that's really well said, Sophia. I think it's just about understanding the mutual value in the relationship or partnership as well. What are you bringing to the table? What are they bringing to the table? How does it benefit everybody? And making that really clear. So just like working with entrepreneurs, you have maybe different pitches depending on your audience. I think the same goes for trying to set up partnerships. Understanding your audience and what matters to them and how the partnership could be really beneficial and valuable, getting that super clear up front, and then making sure that you have plans for how it's going to look in the longer term as well, hoping that this is a partner that could be there for the long haul, not just for the flash in the pan of however long the grant period may be as well. So what makes sense and what actually fortifies the relationship for all involved, that's going to be beneficial.
I love all of that. I'm learning from Molly and Sophia. Thank you both. Yeah, I think that the one thing that I would add is to be aware of overcommitting resources when you're seeking out private partnerships. One of the biggest errors that we see is in the enthusiasm to build a program is the engagement of a whole ecosystem of partners. And when implementation time comes around, the thing falls it collapses like a souffle. There's too many partners. There's not enough funding for a single partner to actually lead, to be empowered to lead and have the financial resources to lead. So my one caveat to private partnerships is making sure that you're identifying the right ones and you're not diluting the ability to actually accomplish something in favor of having every possible partner involved.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate all your comments. I learned a ton. I hope those on the line also learned a lot. If you want to get in touch, you can feel free to email us at info@opengrants.io. And this will certainly be available via a variety of social channels, and we'll send this out to everyone who attended. So thank you all for being here. A big thank you to our panelists. Thank you all for joining us today and providing us with the benefit of your expertise and experience. And we will, hopefully we'll be doing one of these in another year and the pandemic will be over and we can talk about all the cool things we accomplished in the meantime. So thank you all and look forward to reconnecting in the near future, hopefully in person as well.